on a particular area in Owerri. Today is a very remarkable and great day for us in our university, that one of our own, an erudite scholar, is coming today to showcase what actually made him to become a professor. It's one of the intellectual harvests we have in our university. This year, since we relocated from Abia State to this present site, the university has really come of age. It will be 33 years for us, and we are having the 32nd inaugural lecture series of our university. Permit me to take you down the memory lane of how we started and where we are today, so that you know that we've not been very docile, we've not been passive all this while. The university has been doing its best to ensure that the vision and the mission of our founding fathers will definitely come to fruition. The man who kickstarted the inaugural lecture series for us in our university is of blessed memory, Professor Emmanuel Mbenu. Professor Mbenu is a professor of physics, and on August 2005, his lecture dwelt on physics as an agent for development. Next in that line was Professor B.B. Nwoke. Professor Nwoke spoke to us on the gods are not responsible for river blindness, and this was on September 9th, 2011. Professor Yudi Anyanwu of the History Department of our university spoke to us then for the sake of history, culture, and development, November the 4th, 2011. Reverend Father Professor Isu Marcel Onyocha is a professor of philosophy, delivered a lecture on the problematic of African time, April the 26th, 2012. Professor Chinedu Mwajoma, who formerly was the Vice Chancellor of Alex Ekwueme Federal University, Ndufu Alike Igbo in Ebonyi State, spoke on does agriculture have a future in Southeast Nigeria. That was on May the 4th, 2012. Professor Reverend Father Jerome Okonkwo, another professor of philosophy, talked on Oku Danahono Okotaya Adeze, the basic principle of Igbo philosophy of language, July the 26th, 2012. On August 30th, 2012, Professor of Animal Husbandry, Professor Felix Madubike, spoke on bridging the animal protein supply and demand gap in Nigeria, the use of unorthodox feed resources to increase pig and poultry production. A man we loaned to National Population Commission, and of course is representing Imo State National Population Commission, and of the Faculty of Law of our great university, a man we love so well, Professor USF Nabwe, spoke on the dialectics of international development law and the dilemma of underdevelopment in developing countries, September the 13th, 2012. A professor of marketing, Professor Ahamanyawu, dwelt on political marketing as instrument of improved governance in Nigeria. That was on October the 18th, 2012. A professor of French translation, Professor Valin Iobinna, talked to us on communication matters, language in literal and literary concatenation beyond the French eye, November the 1st, 2012. Another professor of French classics, Professor Dominic Chima, dwelt on retranslating African classics of English and French expressions, November the 15th, 2012. On March the 7th, 2013, Professor Uche Obisi Kenkwoko spoke to us on future of urban central marketplace in Nigeria, urban central marketplace, development planning, and their challenges. June the 27th, 2013, Professor Jasper Ahoma Onebusi, a professor of English classics, spoke to us on a nation and her stories, milestone in the growth of Nigerian fiction and their implications for national development. Professor Vince Okereke talked to us on the Igbo man and intrigue in the Nigerian project, March the 12th, 2015. October 22nd, 2015, Professor Asen Aujo talked to us on fear motivation and organizational experience for national development. A professor of education, Professor Mrs. Helen Obodako-Anokam, dwelt on the paradox of foreign language mentality on mother tongue, education, culture, and technology, November 26, 2015. Of blessed memory is Professor Polycarp Azoma Anyanwu, a professor of English classics, and he talked on conversational fluency for social integration by loquacity or accuracy, 20 July 2015. A professor of industrial economics and a former vice chancellor of our university, Professor Innocent Chuka Okonkwo, dwelt on colonial syndrome and the Dutch disease, Nigeria's cultural heritage. Are there options for sustainable cure from the perspective of an industrial economist? March the 15th, 2018. Professor Okorie is a professor of hydrobiology and he spoke on Behind the Urbanizing Fringe, Strengths and Struggle for Biodiversity, April the 26th, 2018. A professor of microbiology, Professor Anthony Nnamdi Okere, talked on our peri-domestic instant neighbors, concord and conflict, June the 28th, 2018. Professor Theodore Chidiezie Chineke, a professor of atmospheric physics, talked on energy poverty in the midst of plentiful resources, how to rescue, August 30th, 2018. The 22nd inaugural lecture was delivered by Professor Ibauchi Romanus Keke. He's a professor of hydrobiology and fisheries. And his topic was hypophyization as a panacea to fish demand problems in Nigeria, implication for national development. Thursday, 28 March 2019. Another professor of English and Literary Studies, Professor Isdo Okawolam Tiala, is a professor of African literature, spoke on Dionysus, Christ, Abu, and African writer, 23rd May 2019. A professor of parasitology and public health, Professor Chinyere Okaga, spoke on Winning the War, Man versus Parasites, Friday, 26 July 2019. Professor of Public Administration, Professor Davidson Njoko, on the 26th of September 2019, talked to us on administrative imperatives for Nigeria's economic stability, growth, and development. Professor Nathaniel Chisimkwo Ohazwike, a professor of plant pathology, spoke to us on post-harvest food losses and food security, the role of plant pathogens. Professor Okechukwu Kelechi Nwanfo, another professor of atmospheric physics, dwelt on atmosphere of violations, our culpability, vulnerability, and responsibility. Thursday, 24th February 2022. O.C. Ezechukwu, a professor of public law and international constitutionalism, spoke to us on constitutionalism and democratic consolidation in Nigeria, the challenges of democratic legitimacy and plurality. That was on Thursday, 6 February 2023. A professor of broadcast communication, Professor Dede Elemowakunkwo, spoke to us on contradictions in a land of plenty, mitigating the pangs of rural poverty in Nigeria through community broadcasting. That was on Thursday, April the 13th, 2023. Professor Chinagoromo Nyemechasinobi, that's the 30th inaugural lecture, dwelt on Professor of Community Nutrition and Public Health Nutrition, improving our knowledge on the conditions of human nutrition in Nigeria. That was on Wednesday, August 23rd, 2023. Reverend Father Professor Ejoku Etelba Atamako is of the Declaration Missionary Fathers, a professor of philosophy, spoke on the proclamations on human dignity and human massacres in the world, Thursday, 18 January 2024. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to interface with another erudite scholar who will take us through a very study lane, and his topic will be on denatured human rights in Nigeria. A new normal is possible, and it's happening today, 16 January 2025. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to our great university, a university that is sited on a hill, a university that has its motto